The word for having balance in Hebrew is meuzan. It comes from the word ozen, which means ear, in which there is the organ that keeps us balanced. Hebrew is wiser than the people who speak it. Every word is deep and full of meaning. Those of you who don't speak Hebrew, tragic loss. It's a beautiful, it is, in my opinion, the best reason for the Zionist movement and the one achievement of the Zionist movement I am 100% behind. The resurrection of Hebrew. Look at the word, the sentence po be'eretz chemdat avot, titgashemna kol hatikvot. Just look at these words, titgashemna kol hatikvot. Lehitgashem, fulfill, to be fulfilled, comes from the word geshem. We're obsessed with our climate. Geshem is rain. Lehitgashem, the ultimate fulfillment is when a cloud becomes rain over a field, like in the poetry of Nomi Shemer, Uchmo anan lehitgashem me'al chelkat sadeh reika ulehavi laregavim et habsora hayeruka. Like a cloud to become rain over an empty field and bring each clot a green redemption. The word lehitgashem, that we become like rain. Could it get any better? I mean, you go to China and you say, oh, how spiritual. It's right here in Hebrew. And the word tikva. The word tikva comes from the word kav. Kav is a thread, a line. You read in the book of Joshua, Vatikach tikvat chut hashani. The prostitute Rachav took the beginning of a thread, a red thread, to mark her house. Tikva is not a cable. It's not a rope. It's a thread, a thin thread to hold on to. So look how much meaning in the word, in the Hebrew language. So I think a Jewish state is the place where we speak Hebrew, and I am, the minute they start another Jewish state, I'm on the first plane going there, but they must speak Hebrew there. A word about Avi and Yoav Schaefer. I know Yoav, and I never knew Avi. But these young men seem to believe that the pursuit of meaning is something more worthwhile than the pursuit of happiness. I've always been low on the pursuit of happiness, much bigger on the pursuit of meaning. And I will agree with Aleph Bet Yoshua that a life in Israel is a life full of meaning. One of the big dangers for us to have meaning in life here is being called a sucker. Freier. Raise your hand if you were called Freier. I'm with you guys. If I had a party to start, I would call it the party of the proud Freierin. Because to come to Israel from San Francisco or from Michigan or wherever you came from, you are already a very absolute Freier. Why would you possibly do this? When you take no for an answer, when you stand in line, when you drive like a human being, when you don't push the old lady on the way to the bus, you are a Freier. And when you lead the initiatives in Israel of ecology, pluralism, consumer rights, feminism, you look at these organizations in the non-government organization world, in the social change world, North American Olim lead the way beyond and above their proportion in the population. So when you guys do make Aliyah, you make a huge difference in much of what is important in changing Israel today. But the big problem is that when you do that, you're called a sucker for giving your life to these issues. So I would like to inoculate you in a little way. Many North Americans who make Aliyah leave Israel, much higher numbers than any other Aliyah because of this. Other Olim also leave Israel after a while, between 5 to 10 years after making Aliyah, but they leave because of difficulties with Hebrew, problems of economics, and problems with security, fear. Not the North Americans. The North Americans leave because of the drudgery of everyday life. In in-depth interviews, they talk about being called a sucker. So I really would like to dedicate my 7 minutes. I can swim about 650 meters in that. I'll be on time. Don't worry. Be suckers. When you're called a sucker, you're doing the right thing. You're being a good model for a different Israel. And the Israel I would like to see is Israel where state-paid rabbis don't preach racism. We've identified 4,000 rabbis in Israel. 4,000 state-paid rabbis, 49 of them, 1%, preach racism as Judaism. We have submitted many complaints to the police and the Attorney General, and so far only one, Rabbi David Batzri from Jerusalem, was sentenced to 6 months of community service in his own yeshiva for saying that Arabs are like donkeys, they're the smut of the earth, they shouldn't be allowed to be human. The reason they're called human is so they could clean and build for us. Terrible, terrible stuff. The man gets a salary from us. So my Israel has to fight racism. One of the biggest tests for Israelis is how we deal with the minority, the 1.2 million Israeli Arabs living among us. And so far, there's a lot to be desired. In my Israel, women are equal as human beings. That's the revolutionary notion of feminism. Feminism is the notion that women are people, and if people can come, for example, to the Western Wall and pray wearing a talit, reading Torah, praying out loud, and maybe putting on tefillin, if people can do that, I think the wall will stand if women could do it too. In my Israel, we don't take one faction of the Jewish world, that Jewish world that we talked so much about how argumentative we are, and we give state power to only one minority group. The one minority group, meaning the ultra-Orthodox and the Orthodox, which are a respected faction of the Jewish people, but something went wrong and contaminated when we gave them so much state power. Most Israelis would probably choose to get married and divorced in an Orthodox ceremony, and that's fine. But a delicious 25 to 30% want freedom of choice in marriage and divorce. If I had a party of 30% of the Israeli population, man, it's the biggest party in Israel. Let's give them freedom of choice. What are you afraid of? Let us choose where we want to get buried, how we want to get buried, how we want to get married, how we want to get divorced. Who's my rabbi? Why do we have to have only the Orthodox choice and nothing else? I think Orthodoxy needs a good kick in the pants to have good competition. The monopoly is bad for Orthodoxy, bad for Israel, bad for Judaism, and it's time we pushed for freedom of choice in this matter. The last point I wanted to say that Israel is way too important to be left to Israelis. And I expect you to feel confident and empowered. You don't just have a right to criticize these issues in Israel. You have a duty to keep your mouth open, your minds open, and to say what you feel, because that's the one shot we have. There is no other sovereign Jewish state on the planet. Thank you.